Hi, my name's Rick Vaness. I'm a Vistage chair in the Washington, Baltimore area. I want to welcome you to a video interview with one of my Vistage members, Glynis Harvey, CEO of the American Institute for Ultrasound and Medicine. Welcome, Glynis.
Thank you, Rick. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Yeah, good to see you again. So, Glynis, as I recall, you've been with AIUM for over 30 years. Tell us a bit about it. How is it you came to AIUM? What are the various roles you've had over that time, and how long have you been CEO?
Yeah, thanks, Rick. I've been with the AIUM since 1990.
Okay.
I started as the very bottom of the organization in a new position that the board had approved as an administrative assistant.
Wow.
I came on board, and the day I started, I reported to what was then the executive secretary position. And the executive director called me into his office and started to talk to me. And I said, "This feels like an interview." And he said, "Well, our executive secretary has just put in her notice,
Wow.
and I'd like you to step into that role."
Wow.
And so very excited. I was not familiar with the association space at the time, and had a large learning curve ahead of me. But I went right into that role, and starting with the spring of 2021, I've been in the board suite and been writing the minutes for the organization, the history of the organization for all that time.
Wow.
So it's been a really exciting journey. I started there, and then computers started to really have an impact in the association space. And my husband, who was in the computer space, said, "You really need to get a website." And so this was like 1993, 1994. And so he helped me program in K-Shell, and we got AIUM.org up and running long before most corporate entities had a website. So managed the website, and then somehow found myself with the director of IT hat on, and on top of my executive secretary skills. And then our publications director left, and I took on that responsibility as well. And so over the years, as I've seen opportunity within the organization, I've stepped up, and I have never been disappointed. It's been an incredible journey. Back in 2012, I was named the deputy CEO, and then when our CEO of 19 years at that point in time retired, I took on the helm. So that would be January of 2017. So it's been 7 years. It's my 7th year as the CEO. And it's just a wonderful organization, and there's so much potential serving our members, serving our community. The AIUM is the place for anyone who has anything to do with ultrasound. So doctors, sonographers, scientists, engineers. If you have a passion for ultrasound, the AIUM is your home to develop guidelines and collaborate on best practices and bring the practice of ultrasound into the next generation.
Can you a little bit more in terms of the size of AIUM, and what are the one or two key things you're doing each year?
So the AIUM is about 8,000 members, about 40,000 customers.
Wow.
So a nice niche market. We put on an annual meeting each year. This year we rebranded our annual meeting to be UltraCon. So really changed up the way we gather. And as we come out of COVID, thinking about making sure that we're gathering with purpose every time that we convene our audiences. Yeah. We also have a journal, a monthly peer-reviewed journal, and webinars, lots of educational activities. We put together guidelines, training guidelines, and performance guidelines for practicing ultrasound. And then work at the next generation of ultrasound. So artificial intelligence, as that's coming online, working with our engineers and startups, et cetera, to bring their equipment to fruition.
Wow. Well, that's awesome. That's great. So share with our audience here, what brought you to Vistage? Why join Vistage?
So there's a lot of there are a lot of resources in the association space for collaboration, for learning, for sharing, but that it's limited to nonprofits. And as we think as we move through the 2020s and into 2030, nonprofits really need to start thinking more like for-profits. So I've spent the last few years focusing on the for-profit space to learn from what we can in that area. And so Vistage is a really nice intersection of that. It allows me to have interactive opportunities with peers that are in many different spheres. And it's kind of somewhat of a parallel to AIUM. And that, as I said, we bring together scientists, engineers, doctors, sonographers, and that it's that confluence, those intersections that really make a difference in how we move forward. And Vistage provides me with that same foresight that I get when bringing these different groups together.
So as you think, let's say we're coming up on 2 years now as a group.
That's right.
Yeah. As you think about over those past 2 years, what have been a couple examples of the impact that Vistage or one of our speakers or conversations we've had in the room that's had an impact on you as a leader or on AIUM as an entity, as a business?
Well, that's hard to distill down because I think every time we get together, I bring something very valuable back to my organization. One example that was super helpful for us was in preparing for UltraCon. At the same time, in January timeframe, we had a guest speaker on the Great Game of Business.
Right.
And so I was able to apply Great Game of Business to our 10 weeks, marching 10 weeks forward into UltraCon with the staff team. And so we got into a cadence meeting weekly. We had goals. We achieved our goals on some weeks. We didn't on other weeks, but it allowed the entire team to focus in on what truly mattered. So that was a wonderful takeaway. I've also been able to use some of the Vistage resources to be able to bring together leadership workshops and facilitators for those workshops. So just having access to individuals that can help me grow my business has been super helpful.
Great. How about you as a leader? So, so often we talk about Vistage and as you know, I like to talk about grounded toward growth. And it starts with the business growth and evolves to organizational evolution and growth, and then personal growth and leadership growth. Is there an example of how you've changed or grown or adapted some of what you've picked up in your own leadership?
I think that as I said, every week there are wonderful. Every month we get together, there are wonderful takeaways from Vistage that I try to apply. I did the Leadership 360 last year, and that was wonderful and grounding as we ground towards growth. And kind of understanding where my strengths and weaknesses are. And just always being mindful. And Rick, you and I talk quite often about your view from the balcony and trying to kind of be there in the moment and watch yourself and look for opportunities to improve.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. You touched on one of the advantages to Vistage is that you're with the for-profits, that it's not just a group of nonprofit CEOs. So it gives you a diversity and breadth of thinking. Is there an example of where a for-profit perspective was different than a nonprofit perspective?
I think all the time I see that, in the nonprofit space, we're focused on mission. And so I find it interesting when we come together in the meetings that we do have where it's find your purpose, find your why. That's somewhat baked in. So that comes very naturally to those of us in the nonprofit space. But being mindful of the financials, we had our last meeting on cash flow was one of the aspects of it. And that's not an area that associations pay much attention to. We spend a lot of time living in a world where we're deferring income, whether it be subscription based from our dues, et cetera. So we're really not looking at cash flow. And that's a key component to making sure that we're being mindful of our store.
Oh, last week, our meeting last
Yeah,
week would be a great example of those key financial instruments,
that's
statements,
right.
and what they mean. Yeah, great. Thank you. Um, so the other thing that all of my folks wrestle with is time, right? Time's the most precious commodity of all. Um, how is it you manage the time commitment to be at meetings, to have our one-to-ones? How do you deal with the time commitment necessary?
I will say at first I did struggle in prioritizing, but once I started coming to the meetings, once I started having my one-to-ones, I realized that the value of that was so much greater than the time that I'm spending in the business. It helps me, forces me to spend time on the business. And
Yeah,
so I actually look at that in a very positive light. So every month it's a break, and
yeah,
it puts me in that space that I need to be and reminds me of how I need to be thinking. And so trying to use that as my lever to kind of, bring everything else into that space rather than trying to carve out a little bit of a time to devote to this area.
and you said it so well. What I find is, if and others have said, other members have said, if they look at this day not as a work day, but not as a vacation day either,
Mhm.
but it's a set aside day to be thinking strategically about working on the business, not in the business. And so take all those busy in the business things and leave them for another day and really block this time off. It seems to be when people, and it's not just physical presence, it's mental presence that you can really be there mentally.
Yeah. And I
Yeah,
think too is having that mindset where, looking at a meeting and interaction, you know, what is it that I can relate to versus waiting for something to relate to me. I
right,
don't know if I'm articulating that well, but bringing myself to the conversation and to the activity rather than saying, "Oh, this isn't mine," until it is. It's mine unless it's not.
right, right. Wonderful. Thank you. Um, so, the core of Vistage and really what started it off back 65 years ago is this whole idea of a member sharing an issue or opportunity with the group and getting input and feedback. So, could you talk about the process that we use around issue processing and what value you have received from teeing something up with the group that we would then process?
Absolutely. So the exercise that we go through is the individual is willing to bring a problem that they're facing forward to the team. They articulate what that problem is. They have an opportunity to be asked questions from the team about different nuances associated with that challenge that they're facing. And then we go into some more problem solving molds. Then at that point we have the person restate their objective, which is interesting that every single time it morphs into something very different than what the original statement was. And so that learning alone, I think, is important because it helps us think more critically about the problem that we're really trying to solve. Because oftentimes we're looking at band-aid solutions and not the essence of the problem. So it's a great way to distill down what you're really wrestling with, and then we go into suggestions and problem solving from the rest of the team. And I found it to be very helpful, not only when I've done issue processing for myself,
Yeah,
but in the issue processing that others are going through. Oftentimes, as I said, you can find parallels in your life to what they're challenged with, and learning to think how different people think through and provide the guidance to a team member helps you with many different areas of your own space. It's also very validating because it feels very alone when you're sitting in the seat, and to hear others have similar challenges that are put before them. There's a lot of camaraderie. There's a lot of compassion and empathy in our group in particular. I don't know about the other groups, but I know Rick has done a fantastic job you've done a fantastic job with our group and bringing empathic people together to challenge each other with care. And that's a unique situation out in the work world.
yeah. Well, thank you. Well, I mean, which really leads to my next question. Um, if you think about, so the group you're a part of is our first group. I have a second CEO group as well, and we're only 2 years old, and yet I feel as though we're quite a group, very much pretty cohesive. Um, could you share what is your perception of the culture of our group? Like you started to go down that path. So how would you describe the culture of our group? And what are the personal relationships like? Why are the personal relationships important to what we do?
Well, I think that your ability to be vulnerable is certainly an important aspect of the culture of the group. And I think that our group, everyone feels very safe, feels very nurtured. We care about each other, but we're not afraid to challenge each other too, and to think differently. And that's a really healthy space to be in. And it allows us to be more open and welcoming of suggestions, even though the suggestions may not be something that you want to hear. It gets back to, what do you need versus, what do you want? And I think that the group is very attuned to the needs of each other versus the wants of each other.
Well, and I think you all did a great job last week putting me in the hot spot and said, okay, it's your turn. And having me do it, share an issue that I'm wrestling with in the group. It was a personal one as opposed to a business issue. And I just thought it was remarkable how the group took that on and was extraordinarily helpful and caring. So I really thank the group for that. Yeah. So could you describe, there are other organizations, other peer organizations, and that's great. I mean, I'm glad to see any kind of a peer advisory group come together. Vistage is a bit different in that we have a chair, and essentially that's full time for me. And in our case, I also have a retired chair who also works with me, Don Cepeda. Could you talk a bit about the role of the chair and what you see as the value we're bringing, and the impact that we're having on the group?
Sure. So I value our time together, Rick, on our one-to-ones on a monthly basis. It gives me an outlet to be able to express frustrations and achievements, and get a perspective that's outside of my space, outside of the association space, that keeps me on my toes, keeps me accountable for things that I talked to you about the last month. And so there's that sounding board component of it. There's the ownership component of our conversations. I think that then you have it in perspective on each of the members when we come together that maybe we might not have of each other. So it allows you an opportunity to be an excellent facilitator and to bring things forward and maybe show parallels between different individuals within the team, to really help us be the best that we can be and use our time most effectively.
Mm-hmm. No, that's actually helpful feedback, because it's probably something I do more than I realize I do. It's just kind of a natural thing that, you two need to connect. And so I do a lot of that kind of connection with members within the group, with our other group, but also with our trusted advisors. So thank you. That's good. That's good feedback. So my last question, Glynis, what advice would you have for someone who is considering joining Vistage and becoming a member of the CEO group, particularly a nonprofit CEO?
Vistage is a commitment, and you want to make sure that you are putting into it enough to be able to get out of it.
Yep.
and that if you put into it, you're going to get out of it. You're going to yield much more than what you put in. So, Vistage to me has been a wonderful opportunity to learn, to grow, to make friends, to get great insight into the way other organizations, other industries work, which then I can bring back to my team, my organization, my board leadership. As an association, I recognize the value of bringing like-minded people together to collaborate, and so Vistage is just an extension of that. So it's a bit of a natural reach for me in the space that I live in. It's validating. It helps you with making you feel that you're part of something much bigger, and that you've got resources to solve some of the problems that come upon you, that without Vistage, you might spend more time than trying to figure out how to come to a solution. And Vistage oftentimes provides that link to a quicker and a better solution than you might have had being alone.
Great. Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for being one of our founding members, and a real contributor to Vistage, and a friend. So thank you.
Thank you, Rick.
Okay.